So each chapter in this book has an overall case study. It's a program that we would develop together, and it would introduce some of the new topics. The book does it in the beginning, but I'm saving it for the end of the chapter, and that way we can reinforce what we've learned as we're walking through this. So I do want you to have your book open as you're watching this video, and it starts on page 38. Okay, so this video, we have had a customer come to us as software developers, and ask us to create a program that inputs the person's sales tax, like not sales tax, income tax. So we've got to figure out, how do we calculate income tax? So that would be the analysis phase. And I want you to take just a moment and pause the video and read the analysis section on page 38. So in the analysis phase, for this particular program, we have some assumptions. Those assumptions are like all taxpayers are charged a flat rate of 20%. I'm not going to read all these to you. You just read them. But we're going to use these to help us with our design. In the next phase, we move on to design, and this is how we figure out how the program is going to do what it does. So take a moment, pause, and read the top section of page 39. Okay, notice in the design section, they use pseudocode, and we've talked about pseudocode before. So this is just a very readable way to determine how we are going to create algorithms that will make our program calculate the income tax. The next phase is implementation. This is the actual coding part. So this is where we get our hands dirty. So go ahead and take a minute just to read that top portion of the implementation, and then we're actually going to start coding this together. Okay, when you have your shell open, remember we can do File, New Window to open a script. And once you get this script, let's go ahead and save this as in your Chapter 2 folder. Save it in your Chapter 2 shared folder. Let's save it as taxcalc.py. Taxcalc.py. Okay, we're going to begin by typing some documentation using 3 double quotation mark sets. So I'll come right back with that finished. Typically, one person is not going to do an entire software or develop an entire software on their own. It's going to be done by a team of people. We've talked about this over and over again. And that's why this documentation is so important. This documentation, let's say you started working at a company and you did this really amazing software for them, and then you got a new job at an even better company. Someone else should be able to go back to your program and understand what your program does. And that's why this documentation is so important. So we have some of the constants that we're going to use, and that's because these aren't really going to change that much. They're not going to change at all by our program. The tax rate is a fixed rate. The standard deduction is going to be the same, and the deductions per dependent. At no point are any other variables in our program changing these values. Then remember, we've always said in every program we need inputs, we have some kind of processing or computation, and then we have outputs. So our inputs, we're asking for the gross income and the number of dependents, because both of those will, the number of dependents will change how much their taxable income is. Then for our computation, we have the math for that. So the taxable income is going to be how much they made minus their standard deduction minus a deduction for every dependent. And then we need to know what their income tax is, which is going to be a fixed percent of what happens when we get that value. And then the output is going to be what the income tax is. Okay, so let's code it and see what happens. In this step, we are actually typing our code. So I have already entered that in. If you want to look on page 40, feel free to do so. The one thing I would like to note is on this equation here in the book, it has this to represent that it's going to the next line. You don't do that, just type it all in one line. Okay, so you'll get an error if you don't type it all in one line. So if you want to pause the video and copy my code, or if you want to refer to page 40, feel free. And now the next step would be testing. So testing is one of the most important parts. This is where we really need to make sure that our code is functioning correctly. It may be that it works, like that your prompts come up, but it could be that you have an error with your math. And until you test that out over and over again with the proper inputs, you wouldn't know. So save your file. Command S to save, and remember we can do F5 on the keyboard to run in the shell. And I've already ran a couple here. If you look on page 41, it gives you some things you can test for. So if you test for $10,000 as gross income, 0 is dependents, then your income tax should be 0. If you test for $10,000 with one dependent, it's a negative 600. So this person will be getting a tax refund. But if we test with, say, 20,000 and 0 dependents, then they owe $2,000. Okay, so try all of those test inputs on page 41, and hopefully all yours turn out like the book. And if they did, success, you made a really awesome Python program.